Welcome to our next workshop on performance management transformation. And it's a wonderful pleasure today to introduce our special guest from the US, Tamra Chandler, who is a globally recognized thought leader, author, celebrated speaker. And she is very well known for developing innovative and effective ways for people in their organizations to perform at their peak. And she's got over 30 years of experience in strategic partnerships across various industries all over the world. She's dedicated her career to revolutionizing HR practices and organizational models. Until very recently, she was with the EY. In 2009, she founded People Firm, earning recognition as one of Forbes magazine's America's Best Management Consulting Firms, which I think is absolutely stunning. And also establishing herself as one of Washington's largest women-owned businesses, which I think deserves a special kudos too. And prior to this, Tamra held leadership roles at Arthur Andersen and Hitachi Consulting. There's a lot more information about her and her background on the website, on her website, if you want to have a look. And of course, and again, relevant to our conversation today, she's written a few books on performance management, and I really like the titles of the books. How performance management is killing performance is one of them, and then rethinking performance management. And here another one, which I really appreciate, is feedback and other dirty words, why we fear it, how to fix it. So a lot of experience. I'm much looking forward to this conversation, and a very warm welcome to you, Tamra. Thank you so much for making the time and joining us.
Absolutely, Adi. Thank you so much, and I'm super happy to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here, Tamra. Thank you very much. And at this point, I would also like to introduce Antoinette. Antoinette Weibel, professor of the University of St. Gallen, as usual, my partner in crime in this project. And Antoinette is going to steer us through the Q&A. And with that, let me just briefly introduce how this session is going to work. So we're going to first have Tamra present the first part of her story, looking towards some of the conventional practices and some of the research and the lessons learned that we have. Then we will go into a small Q&A to answer any questions or listen to any of the suggestions that we have across the audience. And then we will go into the second part, where Tamra is going to talk about some of the ideas, some of the inspiration, some of the foundations for moving us further, and to mitigate some of the issues that she will talk about in the first part of the presentation. And then again, Antoinette is going to lead us through a second and final Q&A to again pick up some of the takeaways, some of the concerns, some of the ideas that come up in the audience. And then we're going to wrap up, and I'm going to ask Tamra for a final call to action. Before we start, though, as always, I would like to just very briefly mention that this workshop, as the other workshops that you will find on our website, you can see the website on the slide, are part of a project that we started last November in Amsterdam with a number of friends, colleagues, and other participants of the HR Congress. And our endeavor is to present the HR World Congress in Porto a performance management manifesto, which should combine some of the ideas across this group of practitioners, of academics, of consultants, in helping other HR colleagues and experts in trying out some new ideas and helping in improving the performance management in their respective organizations. With that, and also on behalf of Mihai and the whole HR Congress team, with whom we have no formal connections, everything we do is absolutely pro bono, I would like to invite you to the summit, where we will be, and lots of other friends and colleagues will be, and hopefully it's going to be a very interesting conversation to again exchange some views and ideas on how HR can step into a more transformational role in helping their businesses to not only perform, but to flourish. And with that said, And without any further ado, let me hand over to Tamra for the first part of our presentation. And again, Tamra, on behalf of everybody in the group and on the call, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about performance management. We're going to talk about shifting away from ratings. What I want to do is start with sort of the state of things. Many of you may know these things, but let's just kind of ground ourselves on kind of where are we now in this whole world of transforming performance management. We'll walk through some of the foundational anchors of sort of my philosophy, my methodologies and content that help you understand where we're going to go with the content. Then we're going to really go deep into talking about ratings, and we're going to talk about the problem with ratings and why it's truly a problem, and I'm sticking to that, and how we start to move beyond them. And I'll start to give you examples of how we can unhook ourselves from the need for that rating and create alternative ways to provide people better insights and organizations better outcomes. I say QA at the end, but we're actually going to pause in the middle of let's talk about ratings and moving and have a discussion there as well. And then we'll open it up for discussion at the end. So this is a nice sizable group here. We have, it looks like, I don't know, 30 some people on the phone. So I'm hoping if you guys have questions, let's make this very discussion. I'm happy if you want to come off the phone come on at any point and ask a question. So I wanted to set a little bit of context. Adi was talking about the books and the work that I've done, and it's kind of helpful to know my background in this space so you understand sort of some of my points of view and where things have come from. So I've been a consultant, as Adi said, for almost 35 years. It's frightening, but have worked with companies all over the globe. In 2008, I started People Firm, which was my own little independent consulting company, little boutique consulting company. And at that time, we were working with some fairly prestigious names doing really strategic work in the people and organization space. One day, I was sitting at my desk in Seattle, which was frankly a fairly rare occurrence, that I was actually at my desk and my phone rang. And it was the CHRO at that time at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It was James Shallower. James called me up and James said, "Hey, Tamara, I have a little project for you." And I was like, "Okay, James, lay it on me." And he said, "We want you to write a white paper for our executives at the foundation about performance management. And we have one really big question, Tamara. And that question is, how is performance management driving performance?" And I was like, "Okay, James, I'm not really in the business of writing white papers. That's not really what my consulting practice does, but I'm intrigued by your question, and they were an important client for us." And, I thought, okay. And he said, "Okay, now bear in mind, our executives are predominantly scientists and technologists. This needs to be data-driven, it needs to be factual, it needs to be short and tight, so get on it." So my team set out and we started really going deep. We've been doing work in this space, but hadn't gone this deep into the research. And so we were starting to really look at the practices around the world, which at that point we identified that, over 90 to 95% of organizations were following what we think of as the traditional model, annual reviews, ratings, blah, blah, blah. There was starting to be some chatter about doing some other things. And so as we were compiling our information and starting to build the white paper, we'd float our drafts over to James and his team, and he would say, "Tamara, you still haven't answered the question, how is performance management driving performance? That's the key question we need to answer." And so we finally got to the heart of it. And what was interesting to us was that we could look at engagement, because we all know that engagement drives performance, right? Gallup has decades of data that shows that to us. So could we say, if performance management is driving engagement, it's driving performance? But the problem we found was, more often than not, performance management was driving disengagement. It was actually reducing how people were connected to the organization. It was creating morale problems. I had one of my gaming clients said, "Tamara, we go into a depression every time we come out of our performance management cycle, and we have to sort of climb our way back out." So what we were finding is, well, to your point, I'm not trying to make HR people mad at me, but because I know all the best intentions around HR here, but what we were doing was actually not driving performance. More often than not, we were actually probably lowering performance through our performance management. So in my first book on performance management, which became, where I went after the white paper, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much to say here. I ended up publishing the book that our first fatal flaw of 8 is without, a theory without evidence is just a bad theory. And so we were kind of hanging on to these practices that are so ubiquitous around the globe, but they're probably not really delivering the outcomes that we want. Interestingly, as I said, at that time, there was starting to be some chatter about how, this isn't working. And this was like 2013, 2014. And then over those next coming years, it got louder and louder. And Josh Bersin, posted in his big thing that, 2015, 2016 is the year that everyone's going to transform performance management. And at that point, I was in the midst of writing my book, and I was just panicked that my book was going to be too late. I was going to miss this big wave, and it was going to happen, and people weren't going to know I had this great point of view. And all that was for naught, because the book came out in 2016. Yes, we saw organizations move forward, but the progress has been glacial. It's been so freaking slow. And so Adi, as your team started together, I'm so excited. Let's actually create that wave that we were hoping to see back in 2015 and 2016, because it is yet to come. Now, over the years that I was out speaking, I would collect data on where people were. And I was always seeing kind of as people were, these are HR people prominently saying, most of them still need a reboot over the years. And then as we go forward, even, I thought I had more data, but anyway, and there's other data that shows this is consistently the problem as well. We also started asking people why. What is holding you back? What is preventing us from moving forward if we have so much evidence and chatter and talk and articles that say this isn't working? And it really came down to 3 things. Number 1 is rewards without ratings. So people truly wanted to transform into a modern approach and let go of this idea of ratings that we're going to talk about today. They didn't know how to do that. I don't know how to pay people without my number, because I put my number in my spreadsheet and I crank it out, and that gives me answers on pay and promotion and all sorts of things. And figuring out how to do that really had people stymied. Secondly, is this idea of manager trust. We have years ago, I presented at HR Congress on the manager dilemma. The problem is that we've promoted too many managers who were great at their jobs but aren't great managers. We haven't ready them to be managers. We have too many of them, and we don't give them any time. So they don't have the capacity, the clarity, or the confidence even to do a lot of the people things well. So we don't have the trust in them to say, look, go have really good, rich conversations with your people to help them develop. So we give them these very formulaic ways to do this, check the box ways to do this, that makes us feel like we're safer with our managers in that space. And then the other thing is we've still had a lot of executive support issues over the years. And some of this I relate to, I'm an executive that got to my position in the world of traditional performance management. It worked for me, so why can't it work for everybody else? There's a little bit of resistance there. Plus, there's this idea that when I look at that big spreadsheet with all those ratings, I feel like I really have something as an executive. I have some kind of insight that may or may not really be what it is, but it feels good to me. So those are the things that have really kind of held people back from moving forward. So there are things that I've been out trying to solve and help people move forward with for the past decade. Even with all the noise, this is the other data I was going to talk about, that, we're still seeing a lot of research and insights that show we still haven't solved this problem today. Gartner's showing that leaders aren't happy, employees aren't happy. We're not really driving value from this process for anyone who's involved in the process. So no matter what we keep talking about, we're just still seeing this slowness to move forward. But at the same time, we've had this new sense of urgency, particularly coming out of COVID, or in COVID, we saw a whole lot of, oh my gosh, our old performance management really relied on me being able to see you every day. And somehow I thought, because I'm looking at you every day, I know how you're performing. And now that I can't see you every day, it's what am I using as any sort of information? And at the same time, we had this huge movement towards, we really need to help people thrive in this new environment. We had a big push, and rightly so, around equity and minimizing the bias in our programs. We have reward strategies that we're starting to recognize are really outdated and don't match the times and what people are looking for. We're trying to drive cultures with stronger trust and stronger connection and more clarity and alignment. So these are sort of the agenda items that people have. And it's interesting because when we look at performance management, when we get it right, it will fix those problems. So here we have, we need to solve these problems. We still have this old model. And so what happens inside organizations, we start to see this battle, these tug of wars about, well, what's the right answer and how do we go there? And, is it pay for performance? Is it equitable rewards? Is it ratings or no ratings? What about goals? Are they cascaded or are they not cascaded? Who owns this process? Manager and employee? What kind of insights? Who has voices in it? So these are all the questions that people are still debating and trying to figure out if they move forward. But what I'm seeing is that part of the reason that we still are seeing this lag, we're still seeing lack of momentum, is when we get in these debates, we tend to compromise or we tend to still take the safe answer. And so we don't have a lot of the courage to take the tougher answers, so we sort of take a few of the better approaches, more modern approaches, but we don't take a holistic approach to it. And so we keep sort of undermining the end game. And what I've noticed is it takes most organizations pretty much 3 goes at it before they'll get it right, because they keep kind of designing, maybe they get part of it right, and then they realize, oh, they kind of didn't address this issue, and then they kind of take it to the next level. So I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone into that are like, well, here's our last 2 designs, here's the research we did on those, here's how we ended up here, but we're still not where we want to be. But we are finally starting to see, I think, more organizations having the courage to go further and really create modern approaches. And we need to do this because performance management, at the heart of it, defines our employee experience. It connects people to strategy, it reinforces the culture, it clarifies my roles and my expectations, it empowers employees to own their own growth and to develop, it articulates how we work together as teams and collaborate, it connects to our recognition and rewards. All these things are part of a good performance management solution. So when we get it right, we literally drive performance of the organization up, not down, like we talked about in the original models. So that's a little bit of the state of things. So here's some foundational anchors on sort of what I've learned over the years in doing this work. When we first started doing that white paper for the Gates Foundation, one of the things we decided was we need to just have a good definition of what is performance management as we know it or as we intend it to be. And there were different definitions between SHRM and all the groups as you went out and looked at it. What we got really clear is what we're trying to do with performance management is drive 3 things. These are what we call the 3 common goals. We're trying to develop people, trying to reward equitably, and we're trying to drive work performance. Now, these 3 goals will be present, I know, in every single organization you will go into. However, the weighting or the importance of them will not be the same. And that will be dependent on the culture and the maturity and what's happening within the organization, maybe strategically and transformationally. And so they might have different weightings. Right now we have a shortage in a certain skill. We're going to shift a lot more of our energy towards develop people, or we're fighting for people in a marketplace that needs a different reward strategy. So these will have different emphases at different times, but they will always be present. Also, when I talk about, designing something that was holistic and modern, oftentimes what happens is people try to carve out elements of it, or they think of performance management as just the annual review cycle, or they don't want to deal with rewards because that's owned by a different total rewards team and not by the talent management team. There's different reasons that people will kind of carve it up. That doesn't work. You really have to, if you're going to design a modern performance management solution, you have to look at all elements of it. And these are what we call the 6 configuration categories. I'm an engineer by training, so I like engineering terms like configuration. So you see that we've got these 6 configuration categories of goals and alignment, feedback and performance insights, career development planning, coaching and mentoring, talent decisions and insights, and rewards and recognition. All 6 of these need to be part of any strong design program. You have to work across them. You have to, in some senses, pull them apart and then figure out where they reconnect again. And on the cover of my book, you'll notice there's a big old hairball of a string on it. And that's because what we've done with performance management in the past is we've tangled these all up and sort of compromised all of them. So when I say we have to sort of untangle them, figure out what we want to do with them, and then identify where they do connect again, that's how we create really great solutions going forward. Another foundational belief of mine that underpins everything that I do is this idea that there's this sweet spot that we're looking for, which is the balance between what the business needs and what your people want. And that there really is some amazing synergies in the middle when we design for the middle. And performance management is a great place where we can look at that, where things like when we lean into growth, it's things that our people want, and it actually drives better performance. So we have to find those areas that we can put more focus on and maybe let go of some of the others that were too weighted towards business needs or people needs. I have to take a moment to talk about feedback too as an underpinning foundational idea. So Audie mentioned my second book, Feedback and Other Dirty Words, Why We Fear It, How to Fix It. So after we did the first book on performance management, we were out there working with all these clients. What we understood very clearly is the future solutions required really strong feedback. And almost every client would say, oh, our feedback around here is horrible, no one talks to us, or it's all just, fluff, or we just don't engage in it. There's all sorts of things that are happening. So we realized, well, if we're going to fix performance management, we have to fix feedback. And when I first started, I thought, well, let's just call it something different. So if you read the PM book, you'll find that I went through and literally crossed feedback out almost everywhere in one of the last edits and replaced it with perspectives or insights or point of view. Like I tried to come up with any other word but feedback. But then as we got into writing the feedback piece, we realized we can't do that. I mean, just check yourself during a day how many times you use the word feedback. It's just like so integrated into the way we think in our language that we had to, instead of try to eradicate it, we had to really change the definition and create a feedback that would do this. It would bring fear down and bring trust up. So how do we redefine feedback in a way that does that? Because when we have high trust and low fear, that's when we're starting to get into a space of high performance. When our fear is high, as Amy Edmondson would tell us, our performance drops significantly. We need that safety, we need that trust. So what we did in the feedback book is we defined some key things. One is a new definition. So this is our definition of feedback: clear and specific information that's sought or extended with the sole intention of helping individuals or groups improve, grow, or advance. So we like to say, check yourself before you wreck yourself. If you're about to lay some feedback on somebody that doesn't fit this definition, stop. Don't do it, because that's not feedback. That's something else. That's some agenda you've got that you're trying to make a point about. So first and foremost is to adopt a new definition of feedback, because if we adopt this definition, think about it, it's about forward. It's always about forward movement. I'm helping somebody. I'm providing you insight that's helping you move in a positive direction because I care about you. It flies under the flags of fairness, focus, and frequency. We have feedback wrong, and performance management is one of the classic places where we do it wrong. We load a bunch of stuff into an annual review, lists of ups and downs and positives and negatives and multiple ratings around values and whatever. It's so much information, and it's completely muddied, and it doesn't help people really move forward. And the only thing they'll remember coming out of it is the one bad thing you said. Even if somebody was so fascinating, you can talk to people who got top ratings, but they'll still be just chewing on, something that somebody said about something that could have been different or whatever. So we really have to think about how do we change feedback in a way that it's frequent in the flow of work, it's focused, it's, as we say, just one thing, and it's fair in the sense that I'm providing it in as a witness, as an observer, not as a judger or a labeler. So we're really changing the way we think about feedback in this process. And we also define 3 roles in it. We've got a seeker, a receiver, and extender. We all play all 3. The way you fix feedback really powerfully in an organization is to lean into the seekers, to create a seeking culture where people feel safe to ask how I'm doing, to seek out feedback, to seek out even their own strengths from their peers so that they understand their own superpowers that they can bring into the organization. This is shifting away from the manager as the knower and teller. We're going to talk a lot more about that as we get into this shift away from ratings. So in the end, what does this all look like? If we go back to those 6 configuration categories, we really want to design design modern approaches that look at all 6 of these and shift us towards things like team-based goals and shared goals, more flexible priority setting in the goal space. We want feedback and performance insights that are lighter and easier, and embrace this idea of this new definition of feedback. We want career development planning that really puts the power in the hands of employees. Sorry, my lips are working. And coaching and mentoring that really helps people move forward, and talent decisions and insights. It's about that really replaces our old calibration. We'll talk more about that. And then capabilities. We're going to kind of talk through all of these. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I want to try to minimize the dog noise. All right, so those are the foundational principles. Now we're going to go deep into ratings, and then we'll pause and talk. All right, so here's what let's talk about ratings. So I talked about, we have 8 fatal flaws of performance management that I've anchored a lot of my thinking on. These are things that Audie and team have been having other sessions talk about, and a lot of the content that is being developed reinforces a lot of these. We're going to here to talk about today number 5, which is we are not machines, and this idea that standardization and fairness is kind of an impossibility in the world of performance management ratings. We just can't get there. And why can't we get there? Well, oh, sorry. I have to put this quote in, because the individual who said this so clearly and who said it back in 1982 was our dear Dr. Edwards Deming. And in his book at that time, Out of Crisis, he wrote this piece, and it's just so powerful because I found this after I was pretty far into my content on the first book, and I just sort of laughed because like he wrapped up the 8 fatal flaws in really one powerful statement here. So the merit rating nourishes short-term performance, annihilates long-term planning, builds fear, demolishes teamwork, and nourishes rivalry and politics. It leaves people bitter, crushed, bruised, battered, desolate, despondent, dejected, feeling inferior, some even depressed, unfit for work for weeks after receipt of a rating, unable to comprehend why they are inferior. It is unfair as it ascribes to people in a group differences that may be caused totally by the systems they work in. So if you go back and look at the 8 fatal flaws, you'll see all of these are sort of in there. Sorry, I'll just back up for a second. We talked about, introducing competition, that the system is such a huge influencer in performance, that we focus on the negative, that the ratings aren't fair. So all that's in the fatal flaws, and Dr. Deming's really said it so well, and as usual was way ahead of us. As I said, this was back in, I think, 1982. So let's talk about ratings associated back to these 6 configuration categories. How do they influence these? As I said, we kind of need to understand how to pull things apart and how to put them back together. So let's start with performance. Let's start with feedback and performance insights, because that's the most relevant in the rating space. So there's this common view that manager ratings provide a fair and effective assessment of performance. Obviously, we think that's why we've used these processes for years. But the reality is science doesn't support that. And there's this element that you've probably heard of. Research has been out there for decades called the idiosyncratic effect that says when I rate you, that rating is 61% about me as the rater and 39% about you. And in fact, if you take error out, it's really about 20-something% about you. And so we're using the system that is really a reflection of the rater rather than a reflection of the ratee. And I think you could see that really easily when you go out like on Amazon and look at book reviews, right? You're going to see book reviews all over the place because people have different points of view. We have different rating skills. Or think about it, your teachers you had in college, the easy grader and the hard grader, like these things are very, we see them all the time. And that's one of the key issues. Also, we're often trying to rate people who are doing very different jobs over very different times and very different systems and put them on a common scale, which again, just creates all sorts of complexities. We have this view that performance management follows a normal bell curve, but it actually does not.
And when we look at it, it follows this idea of the power law, the long tail, where essentially what it tells us is that we can really notice high performers. We're pretty clear about the small number of low performers, but we really cannot differentiate what's in the middle. Yet, ironically, we spend an enormous amount of time, particularly in five rating scale models, arguing about the middle. And I know this to be true because I have had so many clients talk to me about this. Like, they go into these calibration sessions and that's what they're arguing about, the 3s and the 4s, the 3s and the 4s. And why are they arguing about it? Because it influences pay, or it influences things that they care about. Oftentimes their argument isn't even so much about performance, but they're trying to achieve some kind of outcome for the people that they're advocating for. So we spend an enormous amount of energy and time arguing about something that we probably really, as humans, can't differentiate. There's also this view that, oh, well, we'll just change the rating scale and that change will actually give us a better answer. But rating scales make very little difference. There's some really great research out there by I4CP, published in Kevin Oakes's most recent book, where they looked at this in this really fabulous, very global, important study, and found that, you know what, there is actually no linkage between the type of the scale and the performance results of the organization. So you can mess around with your scales all you want. And I've seen, 7 points, 9 points, we're going to create I've seen all sorts of crazy models that just drive people nuts. And, trying to, even at EY, we had a 7-point scale, and, usually and almost always. I couldn't, like, what's the difference between usually and almost always? I have no idea. So, using these 7-point scales, which are really kind of pointless in what we're trying to do if it's really about driving performance. Often now I see a lot of organizations leaning into this idea that we'll just rate goals. And if I rate the goals, and the goals are what is driving, the end all ratings with an average or something like that, and that's driving your pay, that's a good process. Well, here's the problem. We're using, we've been training people on SMART goals forever. Oops, I missed it. So, but if we're connecting those SMART goals to an outcome, which is what I see often, like, okay, so I have to have 5 goals or 7 goals. Those are going to be maybe weighted. Those are going to come average out, and they're going to give me an overall rating. That overall rating is going to drive my bonus. It's going to drive my merit pay. It has all these pieces. What are people going to do when they're setting those goals? Well, they're going to set softball goals. I'm going to set a goal that's easy for me to attain, so I get 5s across the board on all those goals, and it's going to give me a good rating in the end. And this really lowers the performance of the organization. And the data from Leadership IQ is really fascinating, because it's saying, not surprisingly, like if we think about Daniel Pink's content about, people like these big, hairy, audacious goals, when we set these softball goals, I actually don't like my job as much. I set them because I want that good pay outcome in the end, but now I'm less inspired about my work because it's not really challenging, or it doesn't feel compelling to me. This quote I like from Mike Kennedy, where he's talking about, SMART goals provide a labyrinth that shelter workplace mediocrity, clouds the reality of incompetence, fosters disincentive, and impairs the potential of the best people in the organization. I think we just really have to step away from from sort of these microcosms within our traditional performance management of things that we've done, like setting SMART goals and weighting these goals. We also have this belief that ratings provide insights that leaders need for the key talent decision. So I need a rating in order to make, the right talent decisions, which is kind of ironic if you think about it, because what we're sort of saying is, rather than me just making a decision, I'm going to go through some formulaic process where I get a number that helps me get to a decision I probably could have made anyway. And so we sort of just kind of mechanize a process we didn't really need to mechanize, but it feels good to us. And like I said, it often feels good to the leaders. The problem is, we have all these issues with ratings, like I've talked about. They aren't necessarily a fair representation of the individuals and their performance. As Buckingham says, they're a false precision. They give us a level of comfort, but they're a false precision. And then we put them in that machine and we crank them out and we actually make decisions based on them. Who are our high performers, and how are we going to pay people, and who's going to get promoted, and all these types of things. So I remember years ago when Microsoft, in one of their iterations, changed one system to another. I remember talking to one of the leaders, and he said it was fascinating to look how the ratings changed just because the system that they were using changed. And again, that just reflects that those ratings weren't really, they weren't very accurate. I don't know which was the better one, right? The old one or the new one. But anyway, they weren't the same when you change the process. There's this also belief that managers are the true source of the best feedback. So they're the best raters. They're the individuals that really kind of know what are going on and are able to provide the insights. But Gartner's been doing some really fascinating research in this space, and when they were looking at feedback, which we can affiliate with a rating, of course, as well, they found that managers come in third for employees feeling that they really have insight and value, and mentors and coaches and subordinates come in first and second, and team members are a close fourth. So what we really need to do is look at how do we bring all these voices into it. That creates more fairness and more value for everyone. We also, thinking of sources in that, I love this data because this really speaks to our feedback frequency, is that when you look at the number of feedback sources and the feedback utility, you can see there's a peak out there around 8. So when I have like 8 sources of feedback, the utility of that feedback to me is much higher than it is if I have 1. I mean, look at that, 15 feedback utility to 78. Phenomenal. So why do we build these systems that rely on one person to be providing that feedback? Really doesn't make any sense. And then performance management should focus on organizational outcomes. I think lots of the times when I get into this debate, people are like, well, we need these ratings and we need these really metric-driven systems because that's going to drive the performance of the organization. It needs to directly tied to it. Again, in the I4CP data, and this is a 2018 study that they did that I think fueled a lot of the book that Kevin did. What they found was there was only one performance management design factor that had a causal relationship to performance. Let me say that again. One factor that had a causal relationship to performance. They looked at organizations globally, they looked at public and private, they looked at nonprofits, they looked at all sorts of entities and assessed the types of performance management designs and the different attributes that they were using in that design and what was actually driving performance. And in the end, it was really this idea of this growth-oriented, what they called performance feedback. And what was fascinating is that if you lean into this one factor, growth-oriented feedback, those organizations outperform the bottom third, the top third outperform them 2 to 1. And this is profit, revenue, growth. These are real business metrics. And what's driving them again is not connecting people to these hard-coded rating performance numbers that are business related, but helping people grow, helping people advance their skills and capabilities and feel connected to the organization. Then the last one here, ratings support pay differentiation and drives performance. All right, on this one, I had so much to say. I just have to say the finding is just no. I can talk on this subject for a long time. And remember that the number one reason people weren't moving forward is rewards without ratings. But the challenge we have, and this is fatal flaw number 8, is that we are not Pavlov's dog. You can't dangle an annual bonus that says, hey, if you perform this much better, you're going to get, a 1.2 on the annual incentive versus a 0.8. And we as humans don't come into work every day and go, I'm going to work 1.1 level, not 0.8 level. Like, we're not processing that. So it's not actually driving behavior or anything of that nature. We also are completely missing the point that that we aren't necessarily motivated by extrinsic motivations. Pay is very complex, but when you look at it, if people are paid fairly and they're paid a living wage and they feel it's equitable to what should be expected in the market, then you have to use other drivers to drive engagement. If you aren't at that point, then you've got other problems. We also have, you see that in the Fatal Flight, I kind of poke at pay for performance. We'll talk a little bit more why I poke at pay for performance. But the reason I do that is 95% of the organizations I go into that say they're a pay for performance organization, when you actually look at the data, it doesn't support that. There's very minimal differentiation. They spend an enormous time arguing about those 3s and the 4s. And when it comes out, what is the difference? It's this minuscule amount of money. One of my current clients, it was $9 a paycheck between a 3 and a 4, $9 a paycheck. And we spent all this time arguing about it and thinking that this is differentiated pay. It's not. We also, like I said, put a lot of emphasis on this annual bonus, that's the big thing that's going to drive performance. It doesn't have sustaining performance. In fact, go back and ask people what was their annual bonus last year, and half of them won't be able to tell you what the number was. They won't remember. They'll maybe remember a little bit, but if you ask them about something where somebody really recognizes them for some good work, they can probably tell you that. We also have this big problem when we use merit-based models, we completely lose connection to the market. So we start to put performance pay into base pay, and pretty soon we don't know what the base pay is according to the market, and what in there was recognition or performance pay. And we also often don't keep up with the market. So we sort of lose complete sight of what equitable pay is for the roles and the positions that we have in the organization. So there's a lot of reasons we need to really sort of reimagine the way we think about rewards and recognition. And trust me, if you're going to step away from ratings, you can't do it without reimagining rewards and recognition. All right, so here is where we're going to pause and open it up for any discussion. Antoinette?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was fascinating, and I love it because we're completely on the same line here, and many researchers would completely applaud. So I'm just kind of very quickly summarize. So you said ratings, just go for the ratings, not accurate, not bias-free, not useful, costly, nobody likes them, not correlated to organization performance, which I always find most amazing. And we mainly seem to use it for things which are also not correlated to performance, like bonuses. So that is great. However, I still have a question here. I mean, if that is the case, and I believe in it, why is it so hard to get rid of it? And I also give you a modern example. I mean, we have now your great books. We have a little bit of Buckingham, feedback fallacy. We have Carol Sanford, no more feedback. So there are really strong voices out here. And then we have somebody like Ray Dalio, who believes I have to give people all the time feedback, radical in a matrix, so I can see every day whether I'm red, green, or orange in comparison. So tell me what's going on there. Why is it so hard to let go of that?
Well, I think particularly in our Western cultures, there's this belief, you know, we've been rated and graded since we were babies, right? Since we entered school and have grown up. So we have this, you know, we might say we trust the research, but deep inside, we still believe that we have to, I can stack rank people. I know who's good. I know who's bad. So there's this sort of belief that I can do that. Maybe you can't do that, Antoinette, but I'm sure I know the difference between good and bad performance, right? So there's a little bit of that ego and that, like, I got this, you know, not sort of recognizing our own biases and our own fallacies as humans. So there's some of that. There's also this sense of, I like to have stuff I can look at that tells me an answer. And that's where I really do love the Buckingham false precision language, because it is really, it's written in black and white, so it feels good to me. So I feel like it's concrete, but it's complete, bullshit, right? But we trust in it for that. We've also had a lot of noise in the system. You know, there was the conference board research that came out and said, oh, organizations that went rating lists are going back, it didn't work, blah, 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 blah. I was talking to my husband last week about this, and I said, my analogy to that is, it's like this. I quit smoking, and then I gained 20 pounds, so I started smoking again. And it's and what, if you really dig into that research, which isn't really a great holistic view of things, what happened was a lot of organizations stepped away from ratings and replaced them with nothing. So if you give me nothing, that helps me. People do want to know how they're doing. They want some insights. They want some feedback. They're craving that. But if you take away the one thing they had, which is a rating that maybe they didn't like, but you give them nothing back, they'll, hey, I'll take that crappy old rating back. At least that gave me something. And so people have gone back to that in some senses, because they didn't design a solution that created clarity, connection, insights that replaces the rating. So I think the only way we get there, Antoinette, is really demonstrate for people, and this is why I love the mission that Audie and team have here, is to really start to show people what it can look like. And I so often with clients who are just like, just try it, just give it a go. You'll be shocked at how quickly it moves into a better realm. But we're just so tied to these old ideas. I think it's just, it's deep down in our souls.
Yeah, I mean, I can wholeheartedly agree here. And we have two questions, and I think one is going directly to what you were just elaborating on. So we were asked what type of managers mostly use more performance ratings. So going back to a little bit to not wanting to let go, and or rather go back to the evil I know. So can you tell us whether for some it's easier than for others, and whether we can learn something from that?
Is the question, how do we get people to let go? Sorry.
Well, she was or he was thinking it's a type of manager, so it could be personality.
Oh,
and of course it's
yeah.
difficult. So
Yeah. Well, I work with a lot of engineering organizations, for example, and they love ratings, right? And you'll have managers that will create their own even like deeper spreadsheets where they create all sorts of algorithms and things around people. So you certainly see different types of managers that will lean more towards a numerical and mechanized process that gives them comfort. I think to me, it's a maturity of management. It's a maturity of being able to coach and lead and develop people. And I think as organizational leaders, sometimes we have to identify some people aren't ever going to make it into that space, and that maybe they're great project managers or team leads in a certain way, but they're not necessarily people you want coaching and developing your people. So sometimes I think we need to be okay with looking at who are the right people in the organization to help organizations grow. In engineering companies, sometimes what we've designed is sort of a two directional way of achieving insights around performance. So if I have a discipline, like I'm a IT tester, there may be an individual who is sort of my discipline lead that really helps build coaching and skills and capabilities in that particular discipline. And then I also have a project management lead, sort of, so to speak, a team lead that is looking at the work and the quality of the work I'm doing. And those two are kind of providing insights in different ways on different elements. So there's ways we can start to create designs that lean into the strengths of the different types of managers. But yeah, it definitely is. It is very dependent on the quality and the comfort and confidence of the managers.
And I saw a lot of people in the chat saying it has to do with the maturity, it has to do with how we develop. So I think everybody was taking that off. Tim was going a step higher almost. So he's asking to get a client started down a transformational path in performance management. What is it that you ask them to say yes, to really start the journey? How do you convince them?
How do I get them to start the journey? I often will ask to engage the executive team or the leadership team, whoever is sort of making the ultimate decision, and take them through a workshop where we talk about the flaws and the shifts, and we give them examples, and we really spend some time on strategically what are they trying to do and how would this help them accomplish that. And so that if you engage them in the right way, will often build momentum. When I was at People Firm, I sold a lot of projects that way. Was you would just give a 90-minute, 2-hour workshop for leaders, and it would kind of unhook them from some of the old ideas. I've done that. Sometimes when you're if you don't have that opportunity, what we'll often do is, if we're starting a program, for example, if we've been brought in by the talent leader or the HR leader, we'll spend time interviewing leaders one-on-one, making sure we're hearing from them, taking them through a structured interview that includes asking them what the outcomes are that they want. And I'll show in a little bit. We have this tool called the sketchbook that lets people say, what are the outcomes you want in the future? And when we engage organizations, get the voices of people in there doing that, that's often a big wake-up call for leaders as well. We can bring data back and say, this is what people are looking for. And what's interesting is we built the tool so you can have a bunch of different demographics in it, but in the end, I've found it really makes very little difference. The real difference is typically the executive team and everyone else. And so you often have to show that the outcomes they're seeking are different, and that the people aren't, we have to build more connection between the two.
Yeah, I think that was already probably for most very helpful. I have a last question, and then you have to tell me whether you want to go on. But I think that's an important one, which I also see over the chat, several asking. So there is this link between rating and important outcomes, be it
right.
promotions, be it, if it's not bonuses, then merit pay in the sense of salary increases.
Yep.
So how is that going to happen in the future?
Well, that's a perfect lead-in, Antoinette, to the next section, because we're going to talk just about that. So how do we start to design solutions with rating alternatives? And I've gotten so with the work that I do, I'll repeat to like my design teams and the project teams all the time. So we're not saying no ratings, we're saying alternatives to ratings. What are the ways that we let go of that and create alternatives that give us better insights and better outcomes? So there's sort of a structure I would say that let's talk about. When we need to design with purpose, and that gets a little bit to the question about how do you get leaders moving and how do you start to build clarity about what you're trying to seek? How do we build better frameworks that give us the things we want and don't depend on ratings? And how do we make it meaningful for our people and our organization, predominantly for our people? So when we talk about designing with purpose, we always start any work that we're doing and really get clear on some of the underlying philosophies and intent. So going back to those 3 common goals, like what is the weighting around these goals? Which are they equally rated? Are they important? And our little sketchbook tool actually does an assessment of where you are based on what you choose for the future. But we also need to have a really interesting conversation about philosophically, culturally, where are you around things like transparency and employee empowerment, growth and standardization, individual versus team focus, rewards, differentiation, like where do you want to be? Because as you think about these different choices, they will very much move you along these spectrums. And so it's really helpful up front to be clear around, we're looking for greater transparency. We want to be able to publish more transparent pay pieces, for example, or we want to have more transparency in our promotion process and how we mobilize talent across the organization. Standardization, for example, we're going to step away from thinking that one size fits all, and we're going to create solutions that really lean into the differences in the way people work and the different workforce segments we have in our organization. I say if you're we worked with a large semiconductor organization globally, and what they needed for their team in China was not the same as what they needed for their designers in California. And so how do we start to create solutions that really are considerate of those differences across? So these kind of conversations are helpful to have up front. So you start to kind of create some common philosophies and beliefs that you're anchored in. And then, as I mentioned, it's really important to align on what the outcomes are. We call these the design principles. The sketchbook tool that we use starts with 20 that people can choose from, and we force them to pick 6. They don't have to rank them, but we force them to pick 6 of these. And then we use that data, and like I said, we can look at the whole organization, and then we use that data to help start to drive customized design principles for the organization. And this is really important because when you get into the design, it's easy to start to drift. And when I mean drift, it means kind of drift back to those old models. So if we have a North Star in the design principles, we can always go back and check. So one of the clients that we worked with was Avanade. They're okay that I share some of this. And this was their design principles, where we got really clear about what are we trying to do at Avanade. And in this case, they are prioritized from top to bottom. And so when we would look at our different design options, we can always come and bang them back against the design principles and say, are we holding true to these? And it's really a way to kind of help keep our feet to the fire on the design. The other thing is we aren't trying to ignore business outcomes. We want to be really clear about what does good look like in this organization and what are the types of outcomes that we're seeking. And so, understanding, well, what does business impact look like? How important are we focusing on team impact? How much insight are we going to put into role expectations? Can you do your job efficiently? And then looking at, how are you showing up? The working norms, the principles, the cultural expectations we have. These are all dimensions of performance that we want to be able to give people insights in and have and understand where we are. But when we start to think about modernizing designs, we can think about what are the ways in which we can get insights around these pieces and provide people insights on how they're doing against them that may be different from our ratings approach we've used in the past. So it might seem silly, but sometimes people aren't very clear about what good looks like. What is it that contribution and impact really looks like in this organization? So you have to take some time to talk about that. Then this is where the meat really comes in, is, well, how do we start to build frameworks then that can help us have the insights we need, make the talent decisions that we need, et cetera. So at a macro level, what we're trying to do is move away from this rating centricity and to create insights, data, points of view, we'll go back to those different words, that are actionable. Like if I tell Audie he's a 4, that doesn't give him any action. He doesn't know what to do with that. But if I'm giving him insights around how are you performing against your role, if I'm giving him feedback in the flow of work and how you showed up in that last team meeting and the strengths that you're bringing to it and what we're counting on you to do in the future and love and gratitude for doing that. If I build into my team practices ways in which we do retrospectives and we talk and we learn together, if I have a capability or competency model where people can do self-assessments and look at their growth pattern and what skills they need to build, there's a lot of ways we can start to give people a lot more insights that help them know how they're doing and help them take action on that in a way that's positive for them and positive for the organization. So one of the ways we can think about that, kind of going back to those, well, what's good look like? What are the elements that we want to focus on? Oftentimes we design programs that start to look at things like, well, am I competent in my role? What's expected for the job I'm in? What skills and capabilities are needed? And how am I doing against those? And again, there's different ways we can do that. We also need to look at what is the impact you're having. So I kind of separate this between, can you do the job? And when you're in that job, are you having impact? Because, there are people who are brilliant at their job, but don't have any impact because they're just calling it in every day. And there's people who are, still maybe be learning the skills, but are having big impacts. So we need to sort of pull these apart and understand, how they're influencing the organization. So think about, like, are you capable, competent, and able to do your job? And how is your work driving value for the organization? And then the third piece again is, how are you showing up? Like, we have expectations around how we collaborate and how we team and our communications. And, so are you demonstrating those in the way that you're showing up? We don't have to put all these back to a ratings process. There's a whole bunch of different ways we can start to give people insights on this. So, frequent focus and feedback can give me insights in all three of these. If I'm having conversations with my peers, with others, I can be gaining insights, particularly if I'm seeking it, going back to the seeker culture, I can start to get insights that are really going to help me perform better. Frequent conversations. So we don't want just a one annual review. We want one-on-ones where we're talking about the work and how are you accomplishing the work? What progress have you made? What's getting in your way? We do want points where we actually stop and talk about, well, we had these targets. How are we progressing at them? Do we need to update those targets? Those different types of things. Frequent conversations, so it helps us start to understand how we're doing against those pieces. Gratitude and recognition is a superpower. If I start to understand where people see my strengths, where I'm leaning in, I get recognized for that. I'll do more of it. So how do these things start to help me understand the impact I'm having, how I'm showing up, how I leaned in and helped somebody and I got gratitude for that? I can start to build practices into my teams. How am I doing shout outs in my team meetings? How am I doing retrospectives? How are we setting shared goals and individual commitments against those shared goals and celebrating people who are having impact in that way? And then how are coaching and mentoring fitting into this? What, like, do I have a separate coach that's helping me think about my growth and my how I'm building my skills or how I'm showing up and perceived within the organization? And then finally, like I said, we can have capability models and insights that help me do self-assessments, help me work with a coach on building certain skills, identify places that I need to grow to achieve that next position that I'm looking for. So we can start to really look at this sort of portfolio of ways to give people insights and create frameworks and systems that support that and collect that data in a way. Particularly if you're starting, if you want something that's written, if you want some way that you're replacing that rating, one of my favorite things to do is lean into just plain language. Let's get rid of labels. Let's quit using ratings or, replacing a rating with excellent is still a rating. People get it. They understand that the words were just a happy, lipstick on an old rating system. Instead, can we just use plain language? Can we just talk about how someone's doing? So here's an example where we could say, select all of these that apply. We're not assessing that one's good or bad. It's just giving people insight. This person is early in role and they're progressing well. They're demonstrating growth in the role. They actually are already actively supported by others who are even more junior in that role. There's a way I can go through and select any of these that are applicable to the individual, and then we can talk about them, because really what we're trying to do is drive a conversation. We're trying to, because the relationship, the solution, the growth is in the conversation. So how do we start to put content in that is easy, doesn't have a big overhead, but drives the types of conversations that we want? And this is just one example where we can start to use plain language. I love, a really simple, what are the strengths this person has that I've seen or others have recognized? And what's one thing this person could do to grow, improve, and advance? Like, just that conversation right there is way more powerful than having a debate about whether you were a 3 or a 4. And so just kind of trying to lean into language and conversation. Also, if you're really on the role side, if you're really trying to help people move forward, if HR put more of our energy into creating content that provides clarity and a foundation for those conversations, then we start to have a lot more insight. So I'm a giant fan of role profiles, success profiles, whatever you want to call them, that are not job descriptions. These are designed for employees and managers to understand what great looks like in that particular role. They include, a link to a competency or capability model. They talk about success metrics. They show pie charts of like where your time should be spent. They give you data that you can sit and think about and talk about and understand how you're doing against that, not to punish, but to help people grow and go forward. When it comes to goals and alignment, we talked about the troubles with SMART goals. There's ways we really need to unhook these sort of set them and forget them goal processes that we often end up with SMART goals and move towards other models. If you've got the maturity for it, OKRs are a great way to go, because this creates the stretch concept. It leans into team goals. It creates agility in the way that we manage our progress and go forward. So OKRs are good. Sometimes organizations aren't frankly mature enough for OKRs. In that case, I say lead into team targets and start to think about just individual flexible priorities that support those targets, or sometimes we call them individual commitments. This is what my team is trying to do. This is my commitment to the team for this period, and make those agile and moving as the organization and the business moves. We also need to give language. A lot of our labels come back oftentimes to the talent review. So, talent review can really be part of this process as well. We can take talent review and calibration, and we'll talk about merging them together to create what I call talent talks. But oftentimes we are into label zone when we're in 9 boxes and we're using other formulas to create, where we're putting somebody. That's just another 3x3 rating process, right? Let's step away from that and let's create language that talks about growth. And particularly with this idea that everybody now isn't going to want to be growing on the same pace or in the same way. I was really influenced, I think one of the HR congresses I went to, the professor spoke about the 100-year life and the fact that my kids are probably going to have to work till they're 80. They're going to work a long time. There's going to be on-ramps and off-ramps as they're trying to figure out how to build new skills and keep up with the pace of work. So we need to create a structure that allows people to do that. My parents are ill. I need to slow down for a little bit. I'm new in my career. I want to speed up. I want to go as fast as I can right now. I've done this job for 10 years. I'm ready to do something else. I'm going to completely step sideways and step into something different, or I'm going to redirect my career to a whole, I'm going to leave accounting and become a marketer. So we need to create language or taxonomy where individuals can self-declare where they want to be. And we can use that same language when we go into talent reviews or talent talks to talk about how do we help people grow. So we shift our emphasis from debating those 3s and those 4s, and we get rid of all that negative energy, and we shift the conversation out of calibration and into a talent talk that says, I have a person who wants to go faster. How do I give them experiences that are going to help them go faster? And this is one way where we can really help managers, because these are peer manager conversations, learn from each other. How do I start to coach my employees? How do I give them experiences that they need? How do I talk to them about the skill gap that they have and how they're going to fix that? So creating frameworks that give us the language for it, the growth language, and then the place to talk about it, as in these talent talks. All right, the last element here, which gets to your original question, Antoinette, was the pay piece, right? How do we solve that? So fundamentally, we need to shift our philosophy around pay. We need to step away from merit, and we need to lean into an idea that I call pay for capability, reward for contribution. So essentially, we pull apart pay and we say, we're going to create a base pay model that's market aligned, that is as transparent as we feel we want to be transparent with, that helps employees know if you want a pay increase, you need to move from this position to this position, and this is how much that might look like. So the more we empower people with clarity around base pay and our bandings and how what skills are required to move from one to another, the more we empower them to grow, and the more fair we're going to be, because we have to be transparent about people now know where they are in those bands. That's one element. The second side is reward for contribution. So this is really stepping back into, well, what does good look like here, and what do we want to celebrate? So instead of just at the end of the year using a rating to do some kind of merit increase of 3.2%, we actually say, look, the increase is a market-based increase of whatever it was, 2.5. Now we've got some pool of money that's a pay for contribution pool that we're going to use in different ways. We're not just going to tie it to that rating and that merit number. And we're going to think about what contribution looks like here. And so the way I like to think about it is think about, what things do we want to recognize at an individual level, at a team level, and an organizational level? We call that kind of me, we, here. Like, what's that look like in our rewards portfolio? And starting to create a rewards portfolio that gives me different levers I can pull: recognition, micro rewards, spot bonuses, team rewards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do we do that? And then, so, really kind of getting clear with it. And it starts to look something like this, where you start to build, okay, here's my matrix of contribution rewards. And we look at, well, how are we going to use gratitude and non-monetary recognition? How are we going to use peer-based recognition? Is there a monetary element connected to that or not? What does spot bonuses in the flow of work, and what are our boundaries that will set around that and empower managers to do more? Do we want some kind of high impact award? Do we want to really celebrate the big things or not? That might depend on where you are in that pay differentiation scale we talked about up front. And the incentive bonus, how do we do that in a way that it doesn't require a rating? Because that's the one thing that consumes a rating most frequently: merit, pay, and the incentive. So if we can unhook those from the rating, that's great. You see this frequency thing, what we really want to do is focus on frequency and really, crank up the frequency, particularly on those top elements, the recognition pieces and the spot bonus. So why is that? Well, again, here's some really compelling research from from Gartner that's looking at, and this is hard data to find. I've been searching all over for data like this, but they're looking at how frequently should you be recognizing people for optimal impact to really get the most bang for it. And they're saying 66% of your people should be getting some kind of spot recognition. 66%. Not most organizations are even close to that. 66%. But here's the interesting, even more interesting, you know what that number needs to be? It only needs to be like $315. So you can, if you start to take some of that contribution rewards pay and put it into a spot bonus that you drive frequency, and you encourage managers to be recognizing, you encourage people to be recognizing people on a frequent basis, that's how you drive connection and performance. And then if you really make it personal, you're really juicing it at that point. So we have these old ideas that people are waiting for this giant big bonus at the end of the year, but we can create so much more connection and motivation by really leaning into alternative ways of pay. And this does not require rating. This requires a manager to have some criteria around when do I give spot bonuses. And if that spot bonus peak is at 500, I don't have to prove it. They can give the, I'm going to trust my managers to give that money appropriately. And probably what I need to do is watch how often that's happening. So we're actually encouraging those managers that are failing to engage and not giving more of their people spot bonuses. All right, so the last piece here is making it meaningful. I think what we really need to do is create a model that looks at how this becomes a continuous process, how we lead with growth, go back to that data from I4CP that if we help people grow, the organization will perform. If I learn how to grow, I'm going to have stronger impact in my performance metrics. So really looking at sort of this connection and how do teams play a role in this, and how is continuous feedback, light and easy, one thing at a time in the flow of work, fair, focused, and frequent, how does that lean into creating a model that just kind of flows with us as we go through our weeks and our months of work, and doesn't have these huge peaks and valleys that we have in our current annual performance cycles. We need to, if you didn't figure this one out from me already, we need to just really focus on frequency. One is, how do you create processes that just build in frequency, one-on-ones, team retrospectives, team huddles and syncs, those types of things that drive frequent conversations about performance and growth. How do you bring more voices into it? How do you create a culture where everybody has a voice, where it's a safe environment where we can talk and learn and explore and celebrate and have hard conversations together? Because we know it's all about moving forward, helping us improve, grow, and advance. And then how do we really stress the good stuff? If you go back to the Gallup and Buckingham stuff on Strengths Finders, if you look at all that, I'm a big fan of, oh gosh, now they're just going to leave me, leadership. I'll come back to them. Leadership guys that talk about, really look at what drives leaders and outcomes, and it's truly strengths is there. If we help people understand their strengths, if we help them understand the impact they have, if we help them connect frequently, we can have a huge, huge impact on their performance, their well-being, and their connection to the organization. This data here on the right is from WorkHuman, and I just love this chart because if you look at it, what it's talking about is recency and of gratitude. And the more recently I've been recognized or had some recognition or gratitude shared with me, the lower my stress is. So I literally can increase the well-being of people with frequency of recognition and gratitude. It's that simple, and it costs us nothing, and we suck at it. So we need to get a lot better at that across organizations. I've talked about teams. I am a huge believer that teams are where to lean in. If you're trying to teach people good feedback skills, if you're trying to build a culture of recognition and trust and safety, start with teams. Lean into how your team leaders create that environment at the team level. Once I feel comfortable in my teams, once my leader in my team is starting to ask for feedback and we can engage in it safely, that starts to eke out and create the culture of the organization. We also know that when we have high performing teams, they are sharing positive feedback 6 times more than low performing teams. It's just, we can build those practices into it. We can create growth focus at the team level. Where better to identify if Audie was trying to build this skill and he's on my team, how do we help him? How do we wrap around him and give him those experiences? How do we coach him for that? That's where we can make this happen. So really focus on teams. And then, you know, particularly when we talk about the recognition and the reward pieces, it needs to be connected to impact. I need to say, you did this and we're giving you this reward. That's part of the problem, that merit and the incentives do nothing. They don't connect it. I don't know why I was the 1.1 and not the 0.8. When we can say, we're giving you this recognition because you did X, Y, Z, that provides clarity, that provides impact. When it's timely, you just did that last month and we're celebrating it, not we waited till 9 months later and tried to remember what it was you did. And when I said it's personalized, we saw you do this. We are so happy you're here. We love that you had this contribution to this organization. It's meaningful. That is what people remember. So those are, you know, reinforce those good actions with meaningful recognition practices. So there you go. Hopefully, Antoinette, I answered some of that question, but we can always go back and talk more about it if we need to.
I think it was fabulous, although you were very, very quick. And for me, and probably also some others, we kind of were jumping behind. But I think we have some questions which are building on some things you were saying. And I just want to pick some which I believe are quite important. So one was what was coming recurringly is always a little bit that people are worried that we might not be as fair if we do it this way. So somebody asked how to place the guardrails and check and balances for these rewards and recognition that they're really fair and just.
Right. So, you know, it's interesting when I wrote the performance management book, the fairness, I mean, it was kind of in there, but not like it is now. I've learned a lot myself over the last 10 years. And I now have a slide that I can go back that literally talks about, in our traditional models, all the places that we introduce bias, you know, self-reviews, ratings, like we can go through and look at all these places that we introduce bias. So definitely in this design, we're trying to minimize that. We can never get rid of it. It's a human process, but we can minimize it. So, one, if we move towards market-based pay, that immediately puts us in a much more fair, like particularly if we're transparent about it, we're in a much fairer place. When you look at the other mechanisms, if we leaned into things like spot bonuses, where we're flowing in the work and we're empowering managers, we can be doing equity analysis on that. Like I said, we should be providing managers scorecards. How are they doing against their peers and recognizing their people, giving them data that looks at who have they recognized, you know, over a period of time and who have they missed. We can even start to tap into data, you know, from Outlook and Exchange saying, hey, you've spent, you know, 20% of your time talking to Audie and you haven't recognized Audie in 4 months, like what's up, right? So we can start to prompt, we can start to use data to our advantage to help teach managers, help inform managers or others how they're doing. When we lean into peer-based models, that is the best way to mitigate bias, because like I said, when we looked at that sources and then we went from, you know, utility of 15 to 78, it's because we brought more voices in. So the best way we can mitigate bias is to bring more voices. If Antoinette, you told me how this presentation was, that's one presentation, that's one data point. If everybody gave me insights, that's going to give me a lot more feedback and help me really kind of get to the salient points that are most valuable. So bringing more sources in all these designs is very, very important. The team is, you know, key in that. And then when you get to things like high impact, those are the places where you have the most risk of if you're creating an incentive that's just we're all gonna share in the company performance, the factor is one for everybody, and you're going to try to drive differentiation through something like a high impact bonus, then you need to put mechanisms in place to do that. And if you noticed on the when I was talking about talent talks, let me get back there. Right here it says alignment on recommended high impact awards. So you actually, you know, these talent talks become a place where a manager can put in a request and say, you know, for Tim, I want to give Tim a 10K high impact award for the last 6 months because he just completed this big project and it brought this level of value to the company. And that goes into a talent talk of peer managers saying, yeah, we saw Tim do that. It was well, and that is definitely worth the 10K. Good on you, go forth. Or, it's really, everybody kind of did that. It wasn't differentiated. Let's give them a spot bonus, right? So we can have those conversations and create more equity again by bringing the voices in and having those validated at that level. And then again, do more equity analysis over time. You also need to think about, in this case, different workforce segments, right? You may have, like let's say IT is a group that has more, you might put more budget in their high impact award category for IT because of the nature, the project nature of their work. But maybe in accounting or finance or some of those areas, you put a lot more money into spot because there's less higher, peaks and valleys. It's more of a type of work that just you want to continue to recognize people for the good work they're doing. And so, you can also think about that and how it plays out to create more equity in the organization.
Yeah, and I think the very important message you gave out very clearly that before it certainly wasn't less biased and more just, and you are trying to move closer with that.
Exactly.
Although, unfortunately, we know that the inter-rater agreements are also rather small, but I think that is a very fair way to put it, that you're trying to just say, in comparison, we might be better this time.
Right.
I have two more questions, which I both find very interesting. Maybe I'm starting with that's Otti's question, but I think it's an important one. He was writing several times whether we are not avoiding the all-important question of what organizational performance actually consists of. So, I mean, are we still the same old, or is in your model also organizational performance differently to be seen?
Well, I think you've got, you certainly have classic organizational performance as profit, revenue, etc. But I think you have to look, and I've read some of Adi's arguments in the conversations that have been had, and I agree that there has to be a greater, I think in this day and age, a greater outcome to the health of the organization, the impact in the community, and as well as the performance of, the financial performance of the organization. So I think we really need to look at all of those. And if we go back to that win-win model, find the right decisions that drive the win-win for your people, for the community, for the organization. I think that's ultimately important. I in my heart believe that when we do that, there's better outcomes for all.
Okay, and then we also have another question, which is kind of going to different HR practices. If we have less of these ratings and more of what you're saying, would we not also have to insist more on selection, and how would we do that differently?
Well, I think so. I think if the conversation is around like talent mobility and selecting people for different roles, I think if you reimagine talent review into a conversation that is more looking at those growth models, like where people are in growth, includes the voice of the employee. We like to say nothing about me without me, includes the voice of the employee about what type of growth or experiences they're looking for. And you're also looking at the continually shifting nature of the business and what future skills are going to be needed. Like, everyone's looking for AI skills now. You bring that into a conversation where, again, you can step away from labels like high performers, but look at the skill portfolio you have of people. If you're using a competency-based model, look at their aspirations, look at the types of work that people, the types of positions you need, and I think you can make better choices for folks. I think the other thing that would be good for all of us to do is just try to increase what I call talent velocity. How do we, in general, try to move talent more quickly through the organization and make that something we celebrate? So we celebrate managers who let go of great talent to give them greater opportunities rather than reinforce talent hoarding, which we see in a lot of organizations. So I think there's some goodness that can really come in starting to have these broader insights and moving away from the labels and talking about how do we grow, how do we raise everybody's performance and give people opportunities to step into those positions.
And would make us more consciousness also, or conscious in other decisions as well. I like that. Maybe the last one, because we had in the last workshop this topic. What is the impact of AI in all of this?
Well, I think AI particularly can be helpful if we use it for good. I think that's probably the general consensus of AI, right? Can we use it for good and not evil? But if we use it to provide more insights to people, to help them practice good practices, like I think there's places that we can bring it in that can be very helpful. I think particularly when we're starting to build capability models and skill-based models and those types of things, there's a lot more that we can, AI can give us to help us get a fast start in some of those places. You know, for years, building a rich capability model was hard. It's a lot easier now because of AI. So I think there's good places to use it that can lighten the load and help us be better at the things that we're trying to do, as long as we're sticking to those core philosophies.
Yeah, and I think you're right to be cautious here.
Right.
So, unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions, and so I would thank you, but ask Otti to go over.
Thank you very much. And I mean, what a fantastic presentation, Tamra. Thank you so much. And thanks to you and your dog, who was on the last slide, and I was looking at this dog. and a big thanks to Antoinette as well for not only asking lots of very, very good questions, but also taking everybody's questions from the chat. There have been many, many demands on the chat for your slides, Tamra. So we will make the slides in PDF format available on the page,
right,
with, again, links to all the other resources on Tamra's page. So please have a look there. Everybody who's registered for the seminar will, of course, receive an email with the links to the web page, where also the recording will be probably by next week. We will also send you, Tamra, the questions from the chat that we haven't been able to answer. So just in case you ever have time to look at it, we will then also host the answers again on the website. But with that, I thought it was fantastic. And Tamra and I had a few pre-discussions, and one of our agreements was that very often senior HR directors do not know enough about the reality of the research on performance management. So again, I think hopefully some of our executive colleagues will look at this, look at all the data you've presented, and I think also look at all those brilliant ideas. I've never seen so many of those compiled. It shows the depth of your expertise, Tamra. It was, I think, very, very useful resource for senior colleagues. So thanks for that. And with that, Tamra, I think in closing the webinar, maybe what is your final call to action for everybody who's listening to the recording or listening live? What's
it goes back to sort of how I close the book. It's still the same. Have courage. Like, I just need people to have some courage to go forward and try things. And, you know, it won't be right the first time out. That's okay. Keep going. Like, you just takes that courage.
Wonderful. Have some courage and help us to make HR and performance management a tiny little bit better day by day by day. With that, I would say thank you very much to everybody who joined, and speak to you all very soon again. Thanks a lot.
Great.
Take care.
Thanks, Sadi. Thanks, Antoinette. Thanks, everybody.